that are styled with the Bootstrap library. So it's a little bit different than Bootstrap. You get the same styles, you get the same component interaction, but what's really cool about ReactStrap is it's a library of actual React components that you import into a file and use as if you had written that component. So we'll take a look at that. That will just be a brief glimpse into ReactStrap, and then we're going to spend most of our time on styled components. And styled components are fun. Some people live and die by CSS and JS. Some people don't. So there's kind of this is one of those things that it's like, hey, here's another tool for your tool belt. If you like this, if you enjoy this kind of work, then absolutely use it, go for it. And you have, this is one way to build a React application. There is kind of this group of React developers in the industry that are very much like everything should be done in JavaScript, and I'm not going to do anything outside of JavaScript. JSX, I use React because of JSX, which is HTML in JavaScript. I love styled components because it's CSS in JavaScript, and everything is written in JavaScript, and that's amazing. Personally, that's not my style, so I don't use styled components as much, but I still enjoy styled components, and there is some really cool stuff you can do with styled components. So we're going to cover that today and make a tomato button. Woohoo! We love this tomato button. All right, let's do this real quick. Before we jump into all of this, let's take a look at the InstaClone project. So for today, the tasks will be to try and replace all the styles you've previously written in your CSS. Change everything that you have in your CSS into a styled component, except for where you need to reference your icon class names. So everything but that. You'll start by refactoring search bar to use styled components. So you create a header styled component and then work on the search bar. Then you move on to your post container and move everything that you have that is using styles to a styled component and use that component instead. Then comment section, now you're a pro at styled components. Woo! And we hope, so this kind of talks about what I was just talking about. We hope you are armed. We hope you're armed with the ammo necessary to choose whether or not you like using it, as opposed to vanilla CSS or even Sass or less or some other preprocessor. We don't want you to believe that there is never a time and place for both native CSS and preprocessing to exist, but at least now you have a variety of weapons you can choose from to get the job done. So just like I said, you've got multiple tools in your belt. You do need to go through this project today and convert as many things as you can in your project to styled components, even if it's not your cup of tea. If you don't like what you do today with styled components, finish this project so that you have that tool in your tool belt. It's important to go through things even if you don't like them, so that you have experience with it. And this kind of leads to something that I like to tell new developers who are looking for their first job is it's important to start becoming opinionated about things. Of course, the pendulum can swing too far on this, but what I mean is it's important to use styled components, try it out, and form an opinion on it. And whether that is that you love styled components or that you're kind of like, they're cool, I can see myself using them someday, or I hate styled components. Start forming opinions, because that means to someone that you're interviewing with that you have done some research, you've done some exploring, and you're curious about things, and that curiosity has led you to form opinions, and that is good in their eyes. They want to see that curiosity. They want to see you have a drive to go out and learn and experiment, even if it's something that, if you come back and your opinion is that you don't like that thing. So start forming opinions on these kind of things, and I think that will help you in the long run. However, as I said, the pendulum can swing too far, and you can become overly opinionated and not and closed-minded. So you don't want to be closed-minded by any means at all. I'd love to see you guys having opinions on different technologies, but still open to maybe having your opinion changed, learning new things. There's definitely a fine balance there. So this project today is all about helping you kind of get into forming those opinions and into that mindset. That being said, I think most students that come through this actually really enjoy this afternoon project, and it's like kind of a breath of fresh air after the week we've had. So yeah, let's take a look at, one more thing to mention. I 100% apologize for doing this to you yesterday. Before the lecture started, I came in and made some updates to the README here, forgetting that you probably forked and cloned this project on Monday. And so if you're looking at the README in your editor yesterday, you would not have seen the changes that were reflected here. So I apologize for that. However, most of the, well, if you were looking at the instructions in your editor and they were the old instructions, they were totally fine. They just didn't quite follow the same pattern 100% that we did in lecture yesterday. And it gets even worse if you pulled up the solution branch, because the solution branch was not even close to updated. I did update it on the repo here, but if you were changing branches in your editor, then that would not have been good. What I mean is, if you were looking at day 3 solution, then this README is very old. It still gets you to a working app, and it still gets you to MVP, and it still gets you to a solution, but it's stuff that doesn't really look like what we talked about in class yesterday. That being said, it has come to my attention that solution branches are being used too heavily by some students. I have no idea who or how many, or it's just been brought to my attention that this has become a little bit of an issue and a concern for WEB17, which concerns me, because if we're relying on the solution branches to finish projects, and that tells me that you're not at the level of learning that you need to be to be successful in this industry. And if that's the case, then we have the Flex program. You can defer to WEB18. I mean, there's solutions that we have to make sure that you are personally successful. And if you are relying on solution code to finish a project, we have no idea that you don't have the skills necessary to be successful in this industry. So you can absolutely go through the entire program relying on things like the solution code. And you can 100% fake us out. We will be so excited that you are passing all your projects and doing well in the code that we see you writing. But then when it comes time to get a job and you're asked tough questions and you don't have the knowledge to get a job after this program because you haven't gone through the struggle and the learning that goes along with that struggle, then it's like, what has this investment of your time been for? Why did you go through the program that way when you're here to learn and not here to skate by and just pass our check stuff off of a checklist? That's a little bit harsh. I know that sounds harsh, but it is 100% reality. If this has become a crutch for you, I very strongly suggest that you do whatever you can to change that. And if that means that you never look at a solution branch ever again, then do it. I would much rather see you struggling and see you asking questions and reaching out for help than see you go to a solution branch and copy code that's in a solution branch. And I say this 100% with love and with empathy. I understand the struggle. I know why you're here. I know what you want to accomplish at Lambda School. This is not a way to accomplish your goals. I can promise you that from the experience I have as a teacher, as a boot camp graduate. I went through college kind of this way. I just skated by and did whatever I could to check things off the list and finish my degree, and then was not successful after that. Lambda School is different than that. We want you to be successful. So, okay. Can we just have a big hug? I just want to hug all of you right now. You guys are awesome. And I know the last couple weeks have been tough. But I also know that the majority of WEB17 has been working hard and is doing really well. And I'm very excited for where you guys are at right now. I think you guys have done an excellent job. And I'm really excited to see, especially for this coming build week, I'm excited to see the build projects that happen for you guys to show off the skills that you're learning right now. There's even a point down here below. If we go back to master, if we go to day 4, there's even a point down here that it says, okay, now that you completed this, got to MVP, take a step back, look at what you've accomplished this week. So right now, in your brains, where you're sitting right now, most of you are thinking, this is hard, I'm struggling, I feel like I'm not where I need to be. But if you pause for a second and look back at what you've accomplished this week, I think you're going to surprise yourself at what you've learned just in the last 3 days. So again, I'm excited for where we're at. I'm excited for our trajectory, and I'm excited for you if you need to make changes. I'm excited for you to make those changes. Awesome. Let's do this real quick. I'm going to pull up this. Let's see. I'm actually going to pull this up here. No, that's not the one you're looking for. I'm going to pull this into Code Sandbox, and we're just going to discuss the solution for yesterday. I don't do this often, but I think it is valuable for the higher order components lesson to kind of rehash some of those principles. Cannot find, oh yeah. Need to go into Instagram. This one. That's the one. Okay. So here is the project. It's going to tell me I need React Strap. I really should just fix that. All right. Here is the project here. And minus any good kind of styling. So please forgive us on that. That was not the focus when we created this solution. All right, so in my local storage, I have nothing here. So my login page is showing up. We type something in, and we get a user. And we get our page refreshes, and we see the posts. Yay. And there's even the stretch goals in here, passing in our comments into local storage. So if I clear this out and refresh, there we go. We're back to our login page. So let's take a look at how this is working in the code here. So in my index.js, I'm importing app from app, and then importing Bootstrap CSS to get my Bootstrap styles for React Strap. And then we're rendering app right here. So if we go to our app.js file, let's take a look at what is happening here. So app.js is being exported here. So that's what's coming into index.js. It's got a constructor with state. Doesn't look like it actually needs even a constructor at this point. Okay, that's just fine. So then we've got this component from with authenticate that's being rendered. So what is this component right here? Who can tell me what's being rendered right here? So that the higher order component renders a component based off a condition. Yes. Oh, returns. Okay, yeah, there we go. I like that. So the higher order component is this right here. With authenticate is my higher order component. This is not a higher order component. All right. My higher order component, as Brandon mentioned, is returning a component when I invoke it like this. So when I invoke this component when I invoke it twice and pass in posts page and login page, it's going to return an anonymous component. I've set up a variable to capture that anonymous component, and I'm rendering that anonymous component with my variable here. So let's go look at what with authenticate returns. So if we go into components and authentication, we see that we've got our with authenticate function so here's the outermost function here, and it returns a function that returns an anonymous component. Now this component happens to be a class component. I think in lecture yesterday, we just had a functional component here. But it's good to see that you can return anonymous classes as from the innermost function here. So this is the component that is being returned to this value right here. So we could copy and paste. How is it? There we go. We could copy and paste this class out of here and into this line of code right here. And that is exactly, we would get the exact same thing, right? Because this function call returns this class. So let's take a look at the class. When the component mounts, we are checking local storage. And if we've got a user on local storage, then we set our state to logged in as true. If we don't have a user item in local storage, then logged in as false. Then we come down here to the render and we say if logged in is true, we're going to return our posts. We're going to render our posts. So eventually when this inner component, this anonymous class component gets invoked and gets rendered here, it's going to render one of two things. It's going to render a post page or a login page, completely dependent on whether or not this is logged in. Then, in our login page, if we are at this point, when we log in, when we handle our login submit, we set our item, we reload the page, which causes this to run again. And now that we have a user item in local storage, this gets flipped and we render our post page instead of our login page. So that's the logic there. This is the part that gets a little bit confusing, right? A lot of people want to say that this is a higher order component. It's not. It's the component from inside the higher order component that's getting returned by the higher order component. The higher order component in itself is just a function. And we specify that by giving it a lowercase first letter. There are probably some out there, but you should never see an actual higher order component that's capitalized. They should all be lowercase first letters. And they return some component that gets captured by a variable with an uppercase letter, because that variable has to be rendered in our JSX. And we know that we can't, if we were to do this, we would run into an error. Because you can't, because I'm going to recognize if you meant to render React component, start its name with an uppercase letter. Okay, any last questions on higher order components before we move on with our lives? Can we just use everything in uppercase to avoid confusion? I would say no. We put uppercase for things that will be rendered in our JSX and lowercase for everything else. So it actually helps us avoid confusion if we follow that pattern, because we never want to accidentally try and render an HOC in our JSX And having a lowercase, having that name lowercase will help us to not do that accidentally. That may be confusing now, but when you get used to that pattern, it will be very helpful. So you're in the future, so you're setting yourself up for success by learning the differences here now. So really good question. I wish there was an easier way to do that. This is just a convention, one of those rules you have to memorize, and once that becomes kind of second nature in your mind, then it helps in the future. Are you defining component with authenticate somewhere? Yep, defining it right here. Const. We're defining a variable with the const keyword, and we're saying this variable equals some value. The hard part about subjects like this is we get into the mindset of, oh no, this is going to be really hard, and we forget the fundamentals of JavaScript, right? So I totally understand where you are coming from, but we just have to remember that we have a variable, we'll call this some variable, declared with the const keyword, and it receives some value. And that's exactly what's happening right down here. The other thing, the other fundamental piece that gets forgotten all the time, again, I told you this line is what causes so much confusion. The other piece that we forget, because we're concentrating on this being hard, is that when we invoke a function, whether we query the invocations by invoking it twice, or if it was just once, when we invoke a function, usually it's going to return some value back to us. So if we look at this line of code, this doesn't have to be intimidating. We just have to say, okay, this is a function that I'm invoking. This line of code is going to evaluate down to some value. I can find exactly what that value will be by looking at the definition of with authenticate. I can find what's returned out of with authenticate, and I know exactly what this line of code will evaluate down to be. Once I know what this line of code evaluates down to, I know what value is stored in my computer memory on this variable right here. When I know what value this variable holds, I know what to expect when I render that variable up here. So again, this is intimidating, but once you break it down into the very fundamentals of JavaScript, hopefully it starts to become a little bit easier to see why this works by rendering this here. Great questions. Let's see. In your code, where does search bar and post container live, if not in app.js? So I think what Matt is asking is, if we're not rendering post page and login page here, how is it getting rendered in our app? How is app.js is the overall container component, right? So how are we rendering our login page? How are we rendering our post page? Again, it comes from what is the value stored right here. The value stored is the inner function or the inner component that's returned out of our HOC. That inner component is rendering login or post page. So this is rendering our login or our post page. So they live right here. This component is the value of this. It is the value of this variable here. So that's where post page and login page live, is within this variable right here. Okay, John says, can we talk about that again? I still feel shaky with determining where state should live in the grand scheme of things, and I think my project is suffering because of it. The whole thing seems very hacky compared to others set up, and I would like to know where thinking wrong and setting up safer components. Yeah, that's a really good question, and let me come back to that because I think we can get some value by jumping over to my whiteboard to answer that question. So Intel asks, can you please do another example of making a registration page? That would take more time than we have for the class right now. I think the example we did yesterday would be, if you want to watch the last 45 minutes of lecture, that would probably be helpful. I know you saw it yesterday, but watching it over again might help. Maybe during Q&A tonight, that could be something that could happen. Just don't have time to go through that entire process right now. I'm sorry. I wish I could. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we will jump over to the whiteboard. I'll get that set up during our breaks. All right, come on back to your seats. So we're going to do a quick whiteboarding session, which I really enjoy. This is also a very good question. It's something that we will be able to understand a lot better next week when we're pulling in live data. So the main use case for you at this point for component did mount is to set data to state if you're getting that data asynchronously from an API. So since we're not doing that quite yet, we don't really have a good use case for when to use component did mount. So yeah, let's revisit this in a week. So this is what we want to focus on right now. And I think, thank you, John, for asking this question. I know there are, at this point in the program, lots of students that are feeling the same way. And a lot of times it's hard to in front of your peers, admit that. So thank you for bringing this up, because there's going to be a lot of people that really benefit from this. Okay, here is my whiteboard. Let me bring my microphone over here. And I'll come over here as well. So, state is hard. The entire reason that we even have Redux in the first place is because of state. Let's see if I can move this backwards anymore. Kind of at the, there we go. So yeah, the whole reason we even have React is this idea that state is hard to work with, right? The Facebook team said, we've got a lot of complicated state. It's hard to scale our product to so many users because of our state. So we have React because of that specific problem. Even within React and other modern day web frameworks, state is still a complicated topic and a complicated issue. And why is that? Well, number one, we rely on our state for our users. This is what we're building our websites to display this data for our users to interact with. Number two, so this is what we build our UIs off of. Number two, data changes, right? And building our applications in such a way to track these changes smartly is very difficult. Luckily, we've got some patterns, some architectural patterns to help us manage changing data. One way that is kind of a fail-safe way to manage state is to just manage your state in the uppermost component for that component tree. That doesn't necessarily always mean app.js, but for now with the projects we're working with, because they're so small, does mean app.js. So we'll talk about that, what that looks like. So if we have a component, it's not a very good color. I really should figure out which of these show up well. Okay. So if we've got a component, here's our app.js. If we've got a component tree that looks something like this, right? And we've got some data that lives, let's say we've got a piece of data called user name. And we need username, we're just going to call it u. We need username down here. We need username here and here. Well, if we are managing username in this component and our user goes in and changes their username, then these two components update with the correct data. But down here, we now have data that's out of sync. We have stale data. It's out of sync, and it is showing the wrong data. Because there's no way for this component to say, hey, this data changed, so update the view, because there's no way in React to connect unrelated components like this. This one updates just fine, because as this updates, this component re-renders, gets that data passed down via props, but this component does not. So the idea behind lifting state up to higher components is that if we manage our username data here, do some erasing. Then when username changes, it's reflected there, there, and there. And everywhere in our application that is using this piece of state stays in sync. This gets kind of difficult with common patterns using forms. Let's try this screen. Please work. Can you see that okay? It's still kind of blue. Okay, that works. Okay, so forms. Let's say that this component down here is a user form. And that's why it needs the username down here. Forms are a little bit different because they use state different than this state up here. Okay, this is the state that a form uses is specifically for its input text. So this is what we call UI state. It's state that lives in the browser. It doesn't need to be stored on the database. It's separate from our kind of our app state that we generally refer to when we talk about state and data. So this right here kind of muddies the state waters. Now, the fail-safe way to manage form state is to put form state up here, pass it down, pass it down. Now all of our inputs inside our user form component are still managed up here. We've got our handle changes callback function here. We'll just say form callback. That also gets passed down. And so in our input, when we have on change, we just invoke that callback function from props. But that is a completely, totally fine way to manage all of that. But another pattern that you'll see quite often and that we've done in class, that's probably done in your project now, is that we don't manage our form state up here. Instead, we manage our form state down here. So now this has some state in it. But this form state, if we wanted to change user form, if this was the form to change our username, but our username is displayed here and here, well, now we're managing state somewhere down here that can't pass state changes to other parts of our application. So the way to get around this, it's okay to manage our form state here, because there's nowhere else that we need to know about the text, the actual text on the DOM inside this input, right? So it's okay to manage our form state, to manage different UI state in the component that is actually used on. The way that we fix this problem, though, updating our data here, is right up here. We're going to have on state. Let me get to my purple. We're going to have state dot u, and then we're going to have an update u. Let me spread this out a little bit. I need a bigger whiteboard. All right, then we're going to have a callback function called update u. So down here we have the text for what we want u to eventually be. What it displays at here, here, and here is managed by the state up here in app. The text in the input is managed by the state here in this component. Once our user types in their new username and they're satisfied with it, they've got a button here that they're going to click on. So what are we going to invoke in this onClick handler to make sure that the text that we have in state here updates our username state up here? So the solution is to take this update username callback function, pass it down as props, and when we click on the button, it's going to run props.update username. And what that does is this function here takes in the text from our input. So when we invoke props.updateU, we pass in this .state .input text, right? We pass in the text from our input, which means that this function that lives inside app receives our text from our input through that callback function. So our text from the input is now available in app.js, which is exactly what we need because state.username is managed here in app. So inside update username, we run this.setState, username equals input username, whatever you want to call that. It updates username here. It updates the username displayed here, here, and here. So this whole idea of forms and UI state being managed somewhere else in our application really muddies up this state idea. And so you just have to really, really imagine or really be able to know where each piece of data is being managed. And if you've got a form in a lower component, then that means your main state management component needs to have a callback function that you can pass down to that form so that you can get that input text back up to your state manager. What I suggest is if state is still really tricky in your mind, I suggest grabbing a piece of paper. If you have a whiteboard, even better. Draw out what your state management is going to look like for every single project. Every afternoon, read through the instructions and draw what you understand from the instructions, and try and architect your application before you even get into any kind of code. And hopefully that will help kind of clear up where things are going to be managed. Okay, I'm going to leave this up here. I'm just going to come back to my computer to look at Slack, see if we have any questions before we finish our whiteboarding here. Let's see. Francis, thanks for taking a screen grab. I am going to help, I am going to take a picture and kind of bump the contrast and make it a little bit more clear for you guys to see, but thank you very much. Let's see. Yeah, absolutely, John. I'm glad it helped. Yeah, I would love to do more this kind of stuff for Training Kit. Okay, if you've got other questions, please write it out. One thing I want to do really fast, because I think we have time, and we'll just get through styled components a little bit quicker than I usually do. 1 second, let me grab my phone, snap a picture. Try not to be in the reflection. Okay. Let's do this real quick. Okay, say goodbye. Woo! So this is what, I just want to give you a quick example of what I would do in approaching this InstaClone project. So I've got, let me think. So I know I have a login page, and I know I have a posts page, right? And each post is going to have, or the post page is going to have a list of posts. So this, if I were doing full stack, this is what I would do. But let's change this up a little bit for just front end. Let's draw this kind of in the same bubble format that we just had. So we've got app.js, and we've got login, and we've got posts page. And then post page has, let me look at the file structure we have here. I go to day 2 README. It's got that diagram. Okay, we've got a search bar. We've got post container. Let's draw this out here. Posts container. Post container has, it could have a posts, right? It could have like a post body or something, but then it's also got comments. Comments has, well, it's probably going to live in comments. That's just funny. So then I would do this, and I would say, based on my data, so I would draw out my data, an array of posts, and then I would say like comments is an array of objects, and show that it's an object, user, whatever whatever your data looks like. But we know that we've got an array of posts, and each post, oh, sorry, let's see. An array of posts like this. And each post has an array of comments, right? So that's the important part that I want to get to, is we've got multiple posts that each have multiple comments. So I would come over here and I would say, I would do something like .map, and posts page has an array of posts, so I would .map, just to tell myself that there's going to be multiple post containers being rendered and multiple comments being rendered. And the reason that I want to do that is inside my comments, I have a form. So I'm going to come in here inside comments, and I'm going to say, there's a form inside here, and I'm going to plan on having form state be managed here. Then I'm going to plan on having my post state be managed up here. So since I have a form here that's going to affect my comments, which is going to affect my posts array, then I need to somehow get my text from here, from my state management here, up to app.js. I've also got a form here, right? And whatever I type in here is going to determine what is rendered out of this map. So already by looking at this, I can say I need an app.js. I'm going to need an add comment function. I'm going to need a filter comments or filter posts function. Now when I come into these two forms and I say, okay, I've got a button or an onSubmit, what function am I going to call? How do I get, instead of coming here in my code and saying, I need to run a function off of this search bar that affects that component over there. How do I do that? Well, now I have my structure and I say, okay, I'm going to pass down filter posts as a callback function. Now when I click my button, easy peasy. I don't have a question mark anymore. I'm going to invoke filter posts. Filter post is going to take in my post state and tell my post page and my post container which posts to render on the screen. when I add a comment. I've got add comment down here. It gets passed down. Now when I get to my submit function down here, I'm not saying, I've got to submit. What am I going to do with it? I have add comment up here. I already know, I've already planned for this function to live in app.js, get passed down. I know that I'm going to do props.add comment. And maybe not right now. You probably won't be able to look at this and say, okay, I know I'm going to need the post ID. I don't think there is a post ID. I need to know exactly which post I'm looking at because I'm inside a map. So since I'm inside a map, I need to know what post I'm looking at. So I'm going to pass in, I guess we'll call it the index. And then up here, so in my mind, since I have experience, before I even start coding, I already know that when I run this map, I need to look at post and I need to look at index. Because I know that when I add a new comment, I need that index for that specific post up here in add comment. Otherwise, I will have no idea which post to add this comment to. So in my mind, I've got the experience to see this roadblock ahead of time and plan for it by passing in index here. When I define add comment, I know I'm going to take in an index. I could come into app.js and write out add comment before I even write any of these components because of the experience I have. You don't have that experience, and so you'll get down here and you'll say, all right, now how do I pass in my text here. Oh shoot, how do I know which comment to add it to? And then you'll say, oh, I need index. So then you come back here, pass an index, take an index, and go through the logic. That's okay. It takes a lot of experience and a lot of running into these exact roadblocks before you get to that point. But this is exactly what I would do if I were in your shoes before every single project. I would say, where do I need state? Here's the data that I have. We give you the data. So here's the data that I have. I'm going to need a form here. I need a form here. What callback functions, if I'm managing my data here, what callback functions will I need to run the functionality of these two forms? So there we go. All right. I'll look at Slack real quick, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll jump into our actual lesson for today. Let's see. Probably, I don't know the exactly how you did it. With the outer post page, just map the posts, which contain the header and comments, the search bar. Search bar is out of place. Yeah, again, I don't know. Anyways, this exact architecture may not be the exact solution for this. Is just what I saw quickly. Okay. Let me share my screen again. And we'll look at these quick questions here, and then we'll take a break. So, do you have advice for moving functions or methods and such when we put it on the wrong one? I've put something somewhere and it sort of works, and then I try and move it and it all falls apart. Yeah, I kind of look at it at this point like we're building a spider web, and you've got a lot of interconnecting pieces, and then you realize that one string of your web is out of place. But as soon as you pull that string out, the web kind of collapses on you. An anecdotal story for this would be when I make like a blanket fort with my kids, and then I realized I put the one of the chairs kind of in the wrong spot, so I have to pull it out, and half the blankets collapse before I can move it and set everything up. So my advice would be to first recognize that that is going to happen when you pull that chair out. You have to recognize that half of your blankets are going to come down, but you need the chair in the right place. You need that function in the right component. So get it to the right component first, and then you kind of go into rebuild mode. So it's probably not what you wanted to hear, but it's kind of an unavoidable learning process. And I alluded to the many times that I've faced those exact problems. And because of that experience where I'm at today in my career, I see those problems ahead of time. And I know I have a lot better understanding of where to put components before I write most of my, or where to put functions before I write most of my components. And so you will get to the point that that is no longer a problem because you can foresee those roadblocks. But for now, you need to run into the roadblocks to be able to foresee them in the future. So, yeah, really good question. I wish there was a better way to gain that experience. Terrell asked, how do you determine what component would need state? Yeah, so let's look at this again real quick. So I think if you can draw out your components like this, this makes it really easy. So for now, most of our state is just going to live in app.js. If you have any kind of UI state, like a form, find which component is going to have that form. That is going to hold state. So this is a class component, this is a class component, and this is a class component. Everything else are functional components. So I don't think that there's any, up to this point, that this is exactly how I would structure it. Starting Monday, we're going to have a tiny change to our structure where we're going to introduce multiple pages. So we kind of introduced that with login, right? And we haven't even touched on login with this example. But what we're going to see next week is that we're going to have multiple views and multiple pages. And each of these are going to hold their own state for their own component trees. And so these will usually be classes, but it just kind of depends on the actual component and the actual component tree. So the way I determine where state is going to be, I try and, as much as I can, I lift state up to the highest kind of page level components that we'll see with router next week. For this project, I know after drawing this diagram, this holds state, this holds form state, and this holds form state. None of my other components are going to hold state. Search bar doesn't hold post state. Comments doesn't hold post state. Post state lives up here. Okay, let's see. What is the solution if I need to update something on the app state from a very, very nested component? The solution would be context. Yay, we don't learn context though. So the solution is prop drilling. Just pass down the function all the way down and then invoke your function from that very, very nested component. It's not going to make any difference if you have a component 2 or a function that needs to be called 2 levels down or 20 levels down. It's not going to make a difference. Is there anything wrong with having our add comments button function in the comments components and getting props.post.comments from app.js? Props.post comments. So again, the problem with that is that you're now managing state lower down. I'm trying to think. So you can manage your comment state lower down because no other components need it. But it's kind of bad practice, mostly because it's just better to manage your state in one location wherever possible, unless you have UI state. UI state is kind of breaks the rules for all of our state rules. But this is possible, and you can do it this way. And there wouldn't really be implications for this app. Thinking about future, though, if you practice, if you were to manage your state in app.js instead of comments, then when someone adds a new comment, you would want your, and that gets added to an actual API, so you're making an API call to add a new comment. You'd want to handle that higher up than down in your comments component. So for future development, if you want to practice, if you want to get into the practices now that will help with future development, this is not as optimal of a solution. Let's see. Yeah, no problem. This looks really cool. I'm going to take a look at that later. Thank you for posting that. Yeah, I totally recommend using Context API. It's brand new as of last spring, and I think it will make it into our curriculum very soon here. Why would localizing state where it's actually used be an issue? If you track all of the state at the top of the tree, everything re-renders anytime something changes, regardless of other components needed or not. This is not true. The page on the DOM does not re-render. It will still go through the diffing process, and if it hasn't changed, then it won't re-render. It will go through the rendering process on the virtual DOM, but the actual DOM will not re-render. And there's ways to make sure that you can use pure components. You can use should component update to take care of that. So again, like I said, this would be okay because comments aren't really used anywhere else. So you could do this in your comments component. But thinking about future development where adding a comment is actually going to make an API call and change your overall state for higher up components, then I would manage my comment data still in app.js. There's no such thing as dumb question. But I don't know if HOC is visualized like the other components. If I added the authorized component to this whiteboard, would we have it branching off of app? So our answer to this, we just clarify we should keep all of our event functions in one parent container. Yeah, so the event functions tend to be, probably should be defined where you're managing your state. So if you're doing this situation here, and you're managing your comments state in your comments component, then of course your add comments function will live where that's being managed. So it just depends on your brand of state management. I love this question, and I hadn't ever thought about this, so let's try it real quick. And I know we're pushing time, but I feel like this has been valuable. Okay, so where does our hawk live? So what does our hawk do? It renders either, let's do another color if we have one. Ooh, we've got pink. Ah, we don't have pink. Ixnay on the pink. Okay, we got red. So our hawk is going to be red. So our higher order component is in charge of rendering either that or this component tree or this component tree. So our higher order component, I would say, lives right here. And yeah, it's just going to be kind of a gatekeeper to flip the switch on which component tree actually gets rendered on the DOM. So I think that's how I would kind of conceptualize it here. It's just this kind of this thing out in the ether of the DOM. It's not really rendered on the DOM, but it's kind of the gatekeeper from app to the rest of the DOM to say we're either going to render login or post page. All right. Yeah, it's a gatekeeper. I like it. Okay, I know people are writing. We're going to take a fast break, and that's all the questions we can take on this. Then we're going to look at styled components, but please keep the conversation going if you wanted to ask another question or bring up other comments. So let's jump into our break right now. Okay, come on back to your seats. Let's see. All right, let's finish up our lecture today. So, for React Strap, we are going to just look at this solution branch here because we're using React Strap in the login page. So what is React Strap? This takes us to the alerts. Let's go to components React Strap. So easy to use React Bootstrap for components. So again, like I mentioned at the beginning of class, these are React components that use Bootstrap for styling and conventions. So you come here to reactstrap.github.io, click on components. And these are all the components that you can use in a React application. So let's look at what we're using here. So if you want to use React Strap, you need to add two things to your list of dependencies. You need to add React Strap, and you need to add Bootstrap. Then, in your app.js or somewhere, I think it's actually in index.js here, somewhere you need to import the bootstrap.css. This is all covered in right here. So getting started with Create React App, install Create React App, oh, not Create React App, add Bootstrap, add React Strap, and then don't forget to import the CSS. So it gives you exactly what to import and how to do it here. So this is exactly what I would follow to get started right here. Then we can import, where's my login? We can import whatever components we want and then use those just like we would custom components that we have created. So let's take a look at the button component that is being used right here. So this button component is coming from React Strap. And you can see in their examples here that you can change the color of the button component just by changing what we pass into the color prop. So the props for React Strap buttons are primary, secondary, or the values you can pass to the color prop are all of these here. So let's change ours to info. So if I've got this here, I'm going to change this to info, and it changes the color. I'm going to change it to warning, danger. Okay, so that's how simple it is to use these components. Import it, render it, make sure you've seen the documentation here so you know what properties are allowed. For example, here's a whole list of properties that's conveniently listed out in a prop types object so that we see the property that's allowed and the type of value that you can give it. So we can give, we saw color, color's a string. We can give our button a disabled property, pass in true, and let's see what happens. Now our button is disabled and I can't click it. By the way, one trick that we haven't been over yet We know that we can pass in strings like this, and we don't have to put it inside curly braces if we want to pass a string down as a prop. If you want to pass true, the value true, you don't even need any of that. This automatically passes in the true value. So kind of cool shortcut. If you want to pass in false, you do need to do it this way. But this auto-magically passes in true. Give it a tag, an on click. Ooh, size. Let's see if we can change the size. It's a string sizes. So we've got size large and size small. Again, we could just do this like this, right? Large, small, or not at all. So this is going to be very similar to every component here in React. So have fun with that. There's some really cool ones. Spinners are great to have. Modals, if you need a modal, makes it very easy to work with modals, carousel, so on and so forth. All right. Then we come to styled components. So glamorous. Use the best bits of ES6 and CSS to style your apps without stress. All right, this is what we're going to do for this. I'm going to open up a code sandbox, create a sandbox here, and let me go live with this. And hide notifications, classroom, copy, paste. Positioning, I don't know. Does React have the grid system? I think React is simply just the components. I don't think it goes into like the grid. Oh, it does. Layout components. Okay, yeah, so you can use row, column. You can define column sizes. So yeah, you can do the entire Bootstrap grid layout with React. If you're unfamiliar with this, this is used a lot. This was like the de facto way to lay out your app before Flexbox really became a thing. Bootstrap 4 uses Flexbox now, but still defines its own grid system. So go into the actual Bootstrap to learn about the grid system, the Bootstrap grid system. It's kind of defined modern day grid system, so it's a really good thing to learn. All right, did I post my live link? Yep. So we're going to come in here, and what we want to do is create a button using a styled component. So first thing we're going to do is add a dependency. We're going to add styled components as our dependency. All right, got that checked off. npm install or yarn add styled components. Your first styled components. So we're going to import styled from styled components. Okay, check. Then we're going to create a variable and set it equal to whatever the heck is going on right here. All right, well, I'm sure they will tell us what the heck is happening. Styled dot button, right? Styled dot button, okay? Now, and then this double backtick thing. Oh, let's import this up above our const. There we go. This part right here, styled, is obviously an object with a bunch of methods. Whatever component, whatever element you want to make, if we wanted to make an h1, we would do .h1. If you wanted to make a div, you would do style.div. Section, image. Right now we're making a button, so we're going to do styled.button. All right, this button variable here is now a React component. Oh, that's cool. So this is a React component that you can use like any other React component. This unusual backtick syntax is the new JavaScript feature called tagged template literal. What is tagged template literal? A more advanced form of template literals are tagged templates. Tags allow you to parse template literals with a function. So this has to do with some kind of function. So if you see, we've defined a myTag function, and then we are calling that function. We're literally invoking that function with backticks instead of parentheses. Mind blown. Sorry, my mic was far away, so I may have been quiet there for a little bit. Now it's back, and now you need to turn your computer volume back down. Wow. So you know how to call functions with parentheses? Yep, we do. Well, now you can also call functions with backticks. Ah. If you render our lovely component now, just like any other component, this is what you get. Okay, let's render our component now. Let's just take this away, and we'll say button. Ah, cool. But let's give it like some text. I am a button. Ah, there's my button. Awesome. If we pull this up and inspect it, we will probably see a button. Oh, and look at this. It's got some weird class name things going on here. I'm assuming that it stands for styled components, right? I think that's a fair assumption to make. So the component being created here by calling this function is returning a button element with these generated class names. All right, it renders a button. That's not a very nice button though. We can do better than this. Let's give it a bit of styling and tickle out the hidden beauty within. Ah, it's poetry. All right, so we're going to go back to our styled button, and we're going to add all of these very familiar looking lines of code here. So I'm just going to copy that. If you're following along, there you go. Copy that, paste it here. So I'm going to enter down and paste. Oh, look at our beautiful button. That looks much better. We tickled out the beauty from within. Just tickle that styled component. As you can see, styled components let you write actual CSS inside your JavaScript. This means you can use all the features of CSS you use and love, including, but by far not limited to, media queries, pseudo-selectors, nesting, etc. Okay, the last step is we need to define what a primary button looks like. To do that, we also import CSS from styled components and interpolate a function in our template literal. All right, whoa, slow down here, styled components. So let's do this one step at a time. Import CSS from styled components. So we're gonna go comma, CSS. All right. Now, what was this confusing part of the sentence? Interpolate a function into our template literal. So the template literal is everything inside the backticks. Interpolating a function means, since we're inside a template literal, we can do this $ curly brace thing, which means we're going to do some JavaScript inside this template literal. And the JavaScript we're going to do is to run a function. So let's just start very simply here. We're inside our template literal. We're going to interpolate a function. So we're going to use our interpolators right here. These are the interpolators that may or may not be their actual name. We're going to interpolate a function. All right, fairly simple. We've seen functions before. We've seen template literals, and we've seen these JavaScript interpolators. Now let's go look at what goes into this function here. Okay, so here we're saying that when the primary property is set, okay, let's go back up here. Interpolate a function into our template literal, which gets past the props of our component. Oh, interesting. So we're going to pass in props, and we're going to do something with our props. So if we have a, let's just call this a type prop, and let's pass in primary. So we're passing in props.type into this component. This prop gets passed into this props object right here. Now watch this. This is where the cool part of styled components really shines. So here we're saying that when the primary property is set, we want to add some more CSS to our component. In this case, change the background and color. So what they did was a little bit different than how we've done it. We've got props.type. So we're going to say, we're going to copy this CSS here. Let me give this to you guys. And let's go like this. So we're going to say inside this function, if props.type equals primary, then we're going to do a ternary statement. Actually, let's do, oh, I forgot the name again, the double ampersand. So if this is true, move on through our double ampersand and do our CSS function. Okay, so if this is true, then add these styles to our component. So we're doing the CSS function and the backtick syntax again. So add those, there we go. All right. Hey, where did my styling go? Ah, we don't have our beautiful button anymore. Type equals primary. If props.type. That all looks right, right? Where did we go wrong? Um, do you guys see something that I'm missing? Mine. Yay! I think this is just a code sandbox issue. We have to refresh. There we go. Okay. Everybody is. Can I type? Okay, good. Cool. So we added the type prop, right? And we gave it the type primary. If we take this away and say success, then it goes back to not having this. So let's do a button without a type. And let's do a button. I am a primary button. Type equals primary. Nice. Now we have a reusable component that takes in some props and displays something different based on those props. But it gets even cooler than this, because what if we want a tomato button? Who wouldn't want a tomato button, right? Of course we have to have a tomato button. Let's see. So, I have our tomato button. Quite frequently, you might want to use a component, but change it slightly for a single case, like for our tomato button. Now, you could pass in an interpolated function and change them based on some props. So that's quite a lot of effort for overriding the styles one time. To make a new component that inherits the styling of another, just wrap it in a styled constructor. Here we use the button from the last section and create a special one, extending it with some color-related styling. Okay, so here's our button that we just created. Now, let's create a tomato button. And let's see what the syntax is going to be here. So we've got styled, and we're going to invoke it with passing in our button, and invoke that again with some extended styling, and it's going to return a component. So wait a second, we've got a function that takes in a component and returns a component. What is that called? A higher order component. What? Aren't you so glad you learned that yesterday? Now you can look at this and say, ooh, I know what's going on here. So we're going to take styled, pass in our button, and extend its functionality with the styles here. Okay, let's pass those in. Now we have a brand new component called tomato button. Let's even do a little bit of fanciness here. Why are you not letting me? Ah, it's not letting me type. Oh no. Okay, refresh, save, refresh. Oh man. Okay, I have to stop our live session. And there we go. Tomato button. All right, there's our tomato button. So let's take a look at what we did here. We created a button with this CSS here. We created a way for us to pass in props and look at the props, the type prop. And if we render our button and pass in primary for the type, then we change it to this styling here. Then we took this button component, passed it into this higher order component, and it created a brand new component for us called tomato button with this extended styling here. So pretty awesome. Now we can export any of these. Export const tomato button, and if we had another file, we would import tomato button like this. From index.js. So when you export a const variable like this, you import it like this. So we could do this line anywhere in our application, point it to index.js, and do this, and we would have a tomato button. And of course, you can give it different text in that file. So pretty cool. We could export const button, and now we have a button that you can use anywhere, and we have a primary button that you can use anywhere in your app. So you are on your way now to building your very own style library. You don't even need Bootstrap. You could build it all yourself because you're awesome. That is all we're going to look at for this. Just remember that in the project today, you're going to be using style.div, you're going to be using style.h2, whatever component you're trying to replace, whatever element you're trying to replace, just call that element right here. Let's see if there is documentation. Adapting based on props, we looked at that. Styling any components, past props. Coming from CSS. No, we don't really look at that. We can do some other stuff that you are very familiar with. For example, we could say any of these buttons. Oh, let me take this off. For any of these, we could say and hover. Let's add some extremely obnoxious padding. Let's make this bigger so it doesn't drop down. Ooh, yay. When you hover, it makes everything big and bumps everything around. It's very jarring. But hey, we got hover to work. Cool. So again, you can do whatever lovely CSS, less Sass stuff that you want to do. I don't think less works here. I think it has to be Sass with the braces. Yay. And yeah, have fun with this. This is, there's a lot that you can learn. You can take this so extremely far. You can build your own themes. There's a lot you could do with styled components. So go at it, have fun. Let's see what we need to answer here. Lots of questions, good. I saw something where CSS grid is not automatically available with React. Is that a thing? Is it coming in the future? I have not heard that. I don't know. If you find out a definitive answer, let me know. I don't know if that is true or not. Can you use both styled components and React on the same? Yeah. Okay, so it looks like we've got some good answers coming in there. Thank you. I understand that we use it for theming and styling, but when do you use libraries? Like which kind of projects and what libraries to use for those projects? Okay, so for professional work, for example, the last company I worked at, we had a very talented UI developer that built out our entire, kind of built out our own bootstrap, our own library. A lot of companies actually do that. They have their own custom library with components that you will use. Yeah, so it looks like it's good here. Some good answers here. But yeah, I think it will depend on where you work and what their standards are there. Can we do CSS resets inside of components? Is that taking it too far? Yeah, that's a good point. So if you do it, they will be specific to the component itself and won't reset styling for your entire thing. So CSS resets would be more in the CSS file. I would say either one is fine. Remember, React styling leaks, so even if you put it in app, it will affect higher up components. I noticed in some semantic UI that they pass in props without having a prop name like this. This is just if it is, yeah, this is for error equals true. So that is the only way, that is the only value that gets passed if you don't pass in a value, as it passes in true. What is the double and in CSS doing again? Yeah, big question. You guys already told me the name for this, but I forgot it. But basically, this is a gatekeeper that says, if this is true, move on and interpret this code as well. If this is false, I'm going to block you, and you won't ever access this. So for our first button, primary.type does not equal props.type does not equal primary here. It equals undefined. So that evaluates down to false, and we don't run this code. We don't add these styles. For this one, we are passing in props.type, and we're giving it the value primary. So props.type does equal primary, which means this is true, and we are going to run this code and add that here. So great question. Does the component tree matter when exporting styled components? Nope, you can export and import from anywhere and to anywhere. Media queries, yep, you can just nest the media query. Perfect. So media queries. Let's take a look right here. There you go. And yeah, it's the same thing as we could write that code like this. We could say Is this true? Then do that. Otherwise, do nothing. And it's basically the same thing. Okay. Awesome. That was really fun to do the whiteboarding, and I'm really glad we had an opportunity to do that. I know it took up a lot of our time, and sure, for those of you who that wasn't as necessary for, maybe that wasn't as enjoyable for you as it was for me. So I apologize, but I think for a majority of the class, it was a really good exercise. And there was a comment in that long string of threads that someone said styled components is just like an optional thing. It's just a styling library. We're just giving you an exposure to it. What we did whiteboarding, I think, holds a lot more value than what we talked about styled components wise. So yeah, that's why I decided to go so in depth on those questions. And I mean, for my track record, this is ending early, right? Okay, just kidding. It's really not, 12:13 is really not too bad, 11:13 Pacific time. So I'm really glad we got to take the time to go over that. All right, today you'll be working on removing all the styling out of your app and just building styled components for your project. This is a pretty relaxed, chill day, especially compared to the last few days. If you have functionality that's not in place, I want you to finish styled components first, and then go back and, if you've got extra time in the afternoon, go back and work on functionality that you haven't finished up. Or if you want to kind of rework your architecture after we chatted this morning, take the time to do that. I appreciate you guys. You guys are awesome. I know you're working really hard, and I really appreciate your guys' efforts. I'll see you tomorrow for the sprint project. Have a great day.